Hello, so we're back for the reading of MILELE chapter 12. Previously, we read 10 and chapter 11. In chapter 10, we found out that Keiko's world rule was rejected by 3 of the Council of Nations members. And that's going to cause some issues. And also, we were able to visit inside one of the rooms of the 2-story dormitory from the hub, as well as we learned a little bit more about the Loyals and their relationship with Prince Adani, that one day they would actually live in the Sky Kingdom with Prince Adani, but not until the bride, quote unquote, was ready. And we learned that, of course, Hope is the bride in representation of all of the Loyals. Also, chapter 10 ended with Hope in a bit of a pickle with Keiko, who really was trying to seduce her to his side. But in chapter 11, we are a little, given some hints that Hope will be okay by conversation between Sovereign Prince and Sovereign Emperor. So let's dive right into chapter 12. Eden 2. In order not to alert her security, the Watcher, we haven't really seen him for a while, but here he is. The Watcher remained in a concealed place where he raised his binoculars to look steadfastly at the woman. She sat alone on a grassy slope of the high point. Her body bowed under a weight he recognized all too well: doubt. It was an outcome his master welcomed. They were determined the woman must yield to them or be destroyed. Suddenly, fear overpowered him. He turned, fleeing. Not even his master could contend with the one who now sought the woman. New scene. Hope felt his gentle touch on her head before he sat beside her. Immediately her head fell against his shoulder and she wept. Agios allowed her tears, held her, comforted her until she was able to face the turmoil within her. Hope strained away from him, wiping her eyes with unsteady fingers, unsure of what to say, unsure of how to say it. Then the bottled up frustration rushed out. Why does he leave us to struggle, to wonder, to hope, then only to be in misery? Agios watched her calmly, sorrowfully. Why can't we just be done with it already? Why the wait? Why hasn't he returned? Silence. When will he come back? Why leave us in despair? Prince Adani does not leave you in despair, Agios finally said. He has made it so that despair is not the ultimate result. It is only if you choose it to be. Hugging herself, Hope whined. Oh, Agios, you can be so frustrating. It's like you don't understand. I understand more than you know, loved one. He sighed deeply, then moved to his feet. The late afternoon sun created a halo around him as he towered over her. He held out a hand. Come. Hope resisted for a moment. The other hand she'd taken the night before was still fresh in her mind. That offered hand had left her feeling guilty and indecisive. Even though she'd only spent at most half an hour in Keiko's company listening to him plead his case for her to join his cause, it had left her feeling drained, disillusioned, and depressed. She reached for Agios's hand. There was no indecision here. His warmth closed over her, yet she was still free, not trapped, not entangled. She belonged. Agios led her a little higher, overlooking Agri 6. The waterfall roared. Sprays of water floated up from its powerful tumble down the mountain. Inside the compound, glares from sunspots on the steel frames of the solar panels reached them. Poultry and livestock contained in fenced areas for domestic use roamed obliviously. People moved back and forth among the gardens, utility buildings, the processing plant, storage buildings, outer residences and offices, and the hub. Outside the compound walls, soldiers kept their posts at 5 military guard stations spread along the outskirts of the island, as well as they roamed the island. Agri-workers toiled. The fishing boats were still at sea. Helicopters circled, boats patrolled. The military trained and kept watch. Life moved on, was being lived. The world has rebelled against the only one who can save her, Agios said. She has yearned after the deception of the Weltgeist. She has rejected Prince Adani's offered freedom, though it was at the expense of his life. Yet he still waits, still offers. Agios gestured below. If not for Prince Adani, this island and all that you see would not be here. The mist that has trapped noxious gases and provided warmth would not be here. There are silver linings in everything, dear child. There is also a timing for everything. Sovereign Emperor gets the last word, and all he does is for good. Prince Adani will always command his father's will. Warm breeze bathed Hope's face, as if trying to soothe her agitation. Agios's words sank into her awareness and her heart. He was right, and she was selfish and discontented not to see it. It isn't your help that Keiko wants, Agios continued. It is your loyalty, your life. Startled, Hope looked at Agios. While he stood calmly by her side, she was in turmoil. How did you know? One look from her friend and protector, and Hope realized the foolishness of her question. Of course he knew. She sighed deeply, burdened with guilt. Of course, she's referring to the conversation she had where Keiko was basically trying to seduce her to his side. Agios knew about it somehow. Agios turned to go, and Hope automatically reached for him, not wanting to be alone. He paused, studying her for a moment, his brown eyes deep and warm. You must choose, Hope. But you said I belong to Prince Adani, Hope reminded him, feeling desperate. His betrothed. A gentle smile and a firm response. Yes, but you must still choose. Then Agios turned and continued on his way. An inexplicable ache filled her. New scene. From the top of a rugged, dirt-packed road leading down to 2 huge fishing docks, Boa watched the fishing crew work with amazing synchrony to haul trawler loads of fish into 2 large fishing boats. No matter how many times he saw it happen, since Governor Peter had sanctioned fishing adjacent to the mist patch, it still amazed him. After all, they'd tried for months before giving up fishing as part of Eden 2's wonders. And now to see this, Boa shook his head in wonder. Though it took some juggling to oversee the fishing crew along with his responsibilities as agri-team director, Boa felt he was handling both well. In order to manage his new responsibility, he had delegated more agri-responsibilities to Justin McNeil, his Agri-1 assistant, and had replaced Vohan Batten, his Agri-3 assistant, with another man. Vohan now helped with the fishing expeditions under the management of 2 former commercial fishermen. Cree and Lucas were exploring on the opposite side of the docks, away from the other men and women who were waiting for the fishing boats to dock. Boa guessed the boys had taken his admonition seriously to stay out of trouble and follow Wuhan's instructions. The docks were supported by land where the island jutted under the water west of the mist patch. The ship's port and airfield could be seen in the distance west of the docks. As men hopped out of the boats, those on shore began tethering the vessels, then immediately assisted with transferring loads of marine catch into multiple bins. Tides swelled as heavy winds swept in off the water. The ominous rolling clouds of the mist patch contrasted with the amiable shouts of the men and women as they worked in harmony, transferring the filled bins to two parked trucks sitting on the rugged road. Bowen came jogging up along the road, breathing hard. "Great catch again," he said. "Maybe the best yet." His eyes slitted against the sun as he wiped his hands down the sides of his pants. "Incredible," Boa agreed. His gaze lingered on the work below before he turned to Vohand. "You're okay with the switch from agri to trawling, right?" Vohand smiled, still squinting. "Of course. Like everyone else, I'm just grateful to be here on the island. Not everyone has this privilege, so whatever I get to do, I do." Boa nodded, satisfied. Vohan was pretty easygoing, but sometimes it was hard to figure him out. At times he seemed overly accommodating, but that was probably a good thing. Sometimes the personality clashes on Eden 2 led to conflicts that needed intervention. They probably needed more trained counselors on the island. Though, of course, Agios filled that role perfectly. In fact, he was incomparable. Suddenly, the shouts below seemed more rambunctious. Boa peered down, straining to see what was causing the increased commotion. Cree and Lucas were hunched over, still on their side of the docks, looking down at something. Lucas straightened and looked around frantically. "Come, come, look!" Lucas yelled excitedly. The crew left their tasks and hurried over to the boys. "Looks like they found something," Boa said. New scene. Half an hour later, after her rendezvous with Agios, Hope wandered around the compound grounds. Despite the familiar sounds and surroundings, she felt somewhat lost. Agios had given her much food for thought, but its digestion was difficult. She was reluctant to face it fully. The pungent aroma of waste from the poultry yard assailed her even before she reached it. She stood outside the fencing, watching. Hens and roosters were housed there and allowed to roam free, some for eggs, some for meat. She envied their obliviousness. She continued roaming aimlessly, eventually coming to the vegetable gardens. She was greeted by the women there with nods, smiles, and brief chatter, which she returned even as her spirit remained dampened. Eventually, she found herself back where she had left her travel cart close to the compound gates. She hadn't parked it and was undecided on whether to return to the hub or stroll a bit more. Without really thinking, she grabbed the steering wheel and stepped up onto the cart. After driving past the open gates, she motored in the direction of the runway before veering right off towards the mist patch. The tents there were usually empty this time of day. 2 military guards were usually posted there, not only because of the priceless equipment, but also for continued surveillance of the patch. After all, no one really knew what secrets remained undiscovered there. Thinking it was better to avoid the mist patch, Hope changed course. Continuing down towards the water where fishing now occurred, she noticed the breeze had become stronger. Her attention was then diverted to what sounded like shouts. Boa was standing with another man, Vuhan Batin, at the top of the jagged cliffs above the fishing docks. Suddenly, they moved and started clambering down towards the water. Hope parked her travel cart near where the men had been standing, wondering if another boat or submarine had made it through the mist to the island. The group of men and women normally working there had abandoned their tasks and were huddled together beside the left dock. A patrol boat was rapidly approaching shore. Carefully but quickly, Hope picked her way over jagged landscape, crossing over to the man-made road. She was barely conscious of the damp, salty, fishy air as she hurried towards the group. Their voices suddenly hushed and were replaced by a piercing cry, a baby's cry. Hope reached them, breathless. Pushing her way through, she looked down. Cree and Lucas were squatted on either side of Boa, who was on his knees, bent over a small watercraft. Two women were kneeling on the opposite side of the craft, and inside, with its flailing limbs impeded by a fluffy blue blanket, was a screaming baby. Its eyes were squeezed shut, and its round cheeks reddened with the effort. Instinctively, Hope pushed between Boa and Lucas. She reached down without hesitation and gathered the infant, blanket and all, into her arms. Immediately the child stilled, smiled, and reached for her face. Those around her remained still and silent until Boa exhaled loudly and said, "Well, I'll be." Two soldiers from the patrol boat hurried up from the water's edge, barking orders, taking charge. One reached for the child, but Hope refused to release it to them. New scene. Almost 2 hours later, baby Moses, as he had been dubbed since no name had come with the craft, had been examined, fed, and bathed. Needless to say, his arrival had created quite a stir. Governor Peter had just left Dr. Mark's exam room. Colonel Davenport had come and gone and seemed more interested in the unusual craft than the baby. His technology team would probably have fun with it for days to come. "Remarkable he is in such good shape, considering he must have been in that thing for some days," Dr. Mark commented, looking down at the chubby infant lying on a table in the medical center. Hope nodded in agreement. She picked up the sterile suction bulb that baby Moses had dropped on the fresh blankets, which were cushioning him against the cold steel table. He grasped its narrow end with fat fingers before pushing it up against his mouth. He was probably teething. "The question is, what will we do with him?" Hope asked, feeling increasingly drawn to the child. "That's a good question," Ruth said, coming up from behind Dr. Mark to lean against the table. She held a stack of white cloths, which she placed on the table close to baby Moses' head. She cooed down at him, and he responded immediately with a toothless grin. Drool bathed one of his pink cheeks. "Diapers?" Hope asked. "Yes," Ruth responded, stretching out her hand. "And these." 2 large safety pins lay in her palm. "We've never had an abandoned baby before. I can't believe he was just shipped off like that," Ruth said. "Like many, probably trying to save him," Dr. Mark said. He moved away, picking up the chart with the start of baby Moses' records. He shoved his glasses up the bridge of his nose, looking grave. "Many still believe babies have eaten 2 DNA. "Perhaps they do," Ruth said. "Every non-loyal refugee family that has ever appeared with a baby or young children seems to indicate that. The adults and older children always need the suit, but never the younger babies or children." "Yes, but the world isn't being told that," Hope reminded her. Keiko Base and the Council of Nations have promoted the message that there is no difference. Nathan said it has really helped to stem the onslaught of baby snatching. Hope gathered baby Moses into her arms, loving the feel of him, the baby smell of him. Yeah, right, Ruth said, disgust lacing her tone. They're just still kidnapping any adult they think has Eden-2 DNA. It's hard to fathom, Dr. Mark commented, shaking his head as he scribbled on the chart. What are we going to do with him? Hope asked again, as Ruth gently took him from her to diaper him. At present, baby Moses only wore a woman's extra small t-shirt. It clothed him adequately, but the diaper was definitely a necessity. That's for Governor Peter to decide, Dr. Mark looked up, scratching his head with the pen. They could ship him back on a supply ship, but it would be a nightmare trying to find his next of kin. Hope grabbed baby Moses' chubby little hand as Ruth fastened the last safety pin. We shouldn't send him back, Hope was surprised at the depth of her feelings. Unlike the others, he came alone. You know we're not equipped for babies, Hope, Ruth reminded her, but the look in her eyes made Hope aware that, despite her words, they both shared the same sentiment for baby Moses. Well, I know what I'm going to do, Hope continued, determined. Join me if you wish, Ruth, but I'm going to put Agios on the case. And that takes us to the end of chapter 12 and the introduction of baby Moses. Until next time for chapter 13, take care.